and welcome to this edition of V Radio. If this is your first time checking me out, make sure that you also check out my archives. I've got a lot of content that would appeal both to the reasonable left and the reasonable right. I'm not really a centrist, but I don't really focus on a lot on right versus left politics too much, although people who look at my channel would probably assume I'm conservative. I'm not. I don't really get into those fights because I think we have bigger problems like, truth versus not, thinking versus not. So I guarantee you, regardless of what your political affiliation is, you'll probably still enjoy V Radio. So today, my guest is HunnyBadgerMum. I'm going to let her introduce herself here shortly. Make sure that you check me out on hy.page/V Radio. There you will find all of the places you can follow me. And the reason that that's important is that, uh, hold on a second. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Anyway, the reason that that's important is that we like the algorithm doesn't like me very much. So as a consequence, I put myself out there in a lot of places for redundancy. So I'm on Rumble, I'm on BitChute, I'm on Odyssey, I'm on Spotify, and then Spotify spreads me out to a lot of different podcast places. So there's lots of different places you can see my stuff. The reason why I have a Discord initially was just so I can always post notifications so that you know when I'm up. Same thing with my Facebook group. I use the ad everyone to let everybody know. And the reason for this is because YouTube frequently does not tell everyone when I'm about to go live. So as a consequence, I'm kind of left to doing that. So if this is, again, the first time you check me out, make sure that you subscribe, but don't just subscribe. Consider joining us on Telegram or Discord or any of those other places to be actually sure that you get my stuff. So in any case, going to bring on our guest now. Thanks for tuning in today. And hello. Welcome.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for having me.
So how would I say your name?
My name is Chelly with a
Okay.
hard CH, like as in
Gotcha.
cello. And last name is Bufarash. A lot of people call me Honey or Badger, but Chelly works. So
Okay. Well, the first question I always ask a new guest, as I mentioned off the air, was what is the precipice moment for you? Like, what is the moment in particular that you would say made you go from just being somebody who was observing politics like everyone else to actually wanting to get involved?
um I've always followed politics since I was 18 and could vote. And the first thing I ever wanted to be was a photojournalist. And, life happens. And I think I just decided if I wanted to be a mom, for some reason, that didn't seem like that would be a thing I could do. Anyway, fast forward many years, and my kids are older, and I got a nice camera, and started using it. And I went to the local newspapers in town that are editor owned, and I asked if he needed any help doing the photojournalism, and he said he did. So I just started doing that with my hometown newspaper, which was a lot of, you know, car accidents and business openings, and uh, house fire, and concerts, random, small town things. But there was one thing that came up in June of 2017 that I had decided that I was going to go to and take pictures at. And it was a Trump rally that was going to be held in Portland, in downtown Portland, Oregon. And it was organized by a friend of a friend. And I had a contact at Federalist Magazine, or online, the Federalist online. And so I messaged my contact and said, "Hey, I'm going to this event," and it had become national news. And I said, would you need any, would you care to have any pictures?" And she said, yes, she would like pictures. So I went to that event in Portland. It was a Trump rally, and it was absolutely insane in Portland. As if anybody's listening that knows about Portland, Portland is communist central. That's how I phrase it. There was far more counter protesters than there were Trump supporters, and I took photos of this, and I published my article, and then next few days I was reading different accounts from the media of things that they had written about or said about the event, and I was shocked at how different they were from my experience and what I'd written. And that's the moment that I was hooked and decided I needed to continue to do this, because I felt like that event had some of the most slanted, biased coverage that I'd ever seen. So I decided I would keep going.
And that's kind of similar to why I got into this because although I started way back in 2008, like during the Ron Paul revolution days,
Wow.
and a large part of it was the mainstream media wouldn't cover him, but it wasn't just him. It was a bipartisan problem. They didn't want to cover Dennis Kucinich, and they didn't want to cover Senator Mike Gravel, who I actually ended up working for his campaign for a long time. And what I discovered was just how bad the media really was. And the funny thing is that the left used to understand that. Like there were a lot of documentaries about that topic. And nowadays it just seems like, you're just supposed to follow MSNBC by the nose. And that's ridiculous, obviously. But I kind of came to understand that all corporate media is bad. Conservative or left leaning or whatever, and I think, like, I remember saying recently in an interview, somebody was asking me about it, and I said, "Well, let me put it like this. Mainstream media is like pro wrestling. Whether it's WWE Raw or it's WWE SmackDown, it's still bullshit." You know, and
Yeah.
I think that people get caught up in the idea that like, well, no, my media is better. Like that was the thing is that, Fox News is not superior to MSNBC. It might be giving a pipeline of something that you like to hear more, but that doesn't make them better and vice versa. And I think that people just need to start looking for alternative media. And obviously that's already happening. Actually, somebody was just pointing out that I think it was CNN only has 500,000 viewers, which is
Oh.
more than me, obviously, but think about that. How many YouTubers do we watch? Like, say, Russell Brand or who have millions, right? Like, the mainstream media is failing and they know it. Tucker Carlson was the last big guy for mainstream media, really. And now on Twitter, he gets more views than he did on Fox. So people are starting to understand the importance of alternative media sources to get the truth. And it's not that alternative media is not like partisan because it obviously it certainly can be. What I'm trying to teach people in my audience is just develop your critical and analytical thinking skills and make up your own damn mind. I have a whole series called Do You Think for Yourself? And the purpose of it is to try to help people understand, well, these are the different psychological things that can be done to manipulate you. Make sure that these are not happening to you. And I don't really focus a lot on this channel on trying to convince people to change their political views, and so much as just get real information. Like, stop trying to have an opinion and start trying to actually know what the hell you're talking about. Like, that would be the approach that I push for the most. So, anyway, it's great to have you on today. And today we're going to be discussing the trial of Andy Ngo versus Antifa. So, could you give us some details? Like, just take this from the top as if I don't know anything about it at all.
Okay. Andy No is um, he was just a local journalist in Portland, Oregon. When he started, he was at Portland State University, and he started covering. We started having riots in 2016. Of course, there were other things before that, but it became um, more frequent right after Trump got elected. And I know that he went out to cover that for PSU during that time. I started in 2017, and then I ended up meeting Andy in 2018. We were both on Twitter, and we were covering the same things. So he and I became friends, and we went to some things together to cover things. He, of course, has a much larger audience than I did. I felt like I was. I'm a still photographer and not a videographer, so we definitely differentiated ourselves that way. But he became an object of ire from the left during that time. And back in May of 2019, the end of May, he asked, actually, sorry, it was June. He asked if I would go with him to an event in downtown Portland. It was June 29th, 2019. And if I would take pictures for him, he was doing video, and just keep an eye on him. He'd keep an eye on me. And we went to this event, and it was a pop mob, which is a local activist, and it was a milkshake event, and it was held in downtown Portland, and it was scheduled in opposition to what was supposed to be a Proud Boy event. Proud Boys didn't show; they were somewhere else in town. So it was just Andy and I, and a few other journalists, and a lot of Antifa related affiliated people. And they started to milkshake Andy. They threw milkshakes on him, and it eventually culminated in a very severe beating that I was unable to witness because I got surrounded. I wasn't touched that day. And he was beat so bad he had a subdural hematoma. I think I'm saying that right. It was a brain bleed, and he was hospitalized for I think it was at 24 hours. So,
And even though you didn't see it, there's plenty of video of that. Like,
yeah,
people can find it. Yeah.
yes. Oh, there's absolutely video of it. There's video of about half of it. The rest of it, for some reason, didn't get recorded on anything. So that happened, and then if you fast forward, he continued in coverage, and his reach grew exponentially. He wrote a book about Antifa, and was consulted as an expert on their movement. And during that time, their hatred for him grew also exponentially. So he was very much, and still is, a target. He had gone out in block, and if anybody doesn't know what block is, it's when um, people dress up head to toe in black, a lot of times even including sunglasses, so you have nothing identifying showing, and you can commit crimes, and it's pretty hard to prove you did something. So he'd gone out in block so he could film undercover at an event, and it was May of 2021. And John Hacker, a local activist who calls himself a far right extremism researcher, spotted Andy. And spotted Andy in block and confronted him, pointed him out. This is my belief, and I believe that they proved that at trial, that John pointed him out. And he ended up getting severely beat. I wasn't with him that night, though he texted me at I think it was 3 a.m. and I didn't even hear it. He was like, "Can you take me to the hospital?" And then he immediately left town. He was able to get out of town before he even got medical treatment. So John Hacker is also somebody who assaulted him in 2018. So the trial is a civil trial, not a criminal trial, and he was trying to show that these people were responsible for him getting beat. And there were several defendants. One settled, Benjamin Bolin. Three, I believe these three were from the milkshake incident, which is such a downplay of the violence that day. That was from the day that he got beat, where they were also throwing milkshakes on him. I believe those three defaulted. So these two that I went to the trial for, John Hacker and Elizabeth Richter, were being sued along with Rose City Antifa. But in July, I believe, um, a judge ruled that he could not sue Rose City Antifa because they're not an organization with identified individuals. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say I said that exactly right, but essentially they were dismissed from the lawsuit, and that left only John Hacker and Elizabeth Richter. And both of those people were involved in the May of 2021 incident where they spotted him and essentially sicked people on him, when he received a beating. So that is what this trial was about: is seeing if they could find if they could be held responsible for initiating that beating. Hopefully that made sense.
No, it all made sense. What doesn't make sense is how difficult it is to ever get anything done to these people for what they're doing. And it's also just that, so give you a little background because I was at Occupy. Antifa,
Uh-huh.
although they called themselves just Black Bloc in many cases back then, was very open about what they were doing. And they very clearly were a group that was organized, that had meetings, that, and like, there's a weird thing that happened. Like, I was doing some research on it once and I kind of nailed it down. I think it's sometime in around 2017 was around the time that the news media began to pretend like they don't exist. Like,
Huh.
that's not really a thing, right? And I'm like, this is
Yeah.
bullshit. We saw them every day. Like, they would, because Occupy was a strictly nonviolent movement for the most part, like 90%. And if anything violent did happen, then we immediately usually went like and did press conferences to say that was not us. We don't like that. Like, we don't do that. So there were two groups that were trying to militantize Occupy. One of them was Antifa, and then the other one would be BAM, which is by any means necessary, which I would call
Yes.
the precursor to the violent wings of Black Lives Matter. And I remember distinctly once because I got so sick of what was happening to us at Occupy Detroit with these people following us and breaking stuff and us getting blamed, was that we needed to make a public declaration that we don't advocate violence as a movement. And both BAM and the Antifa bloc that was present tried to stop me. They failed. But it doesn't change the fact that they really thought that Occupy was going to be their shot to be able to create some kind of crazy communist uprising. And the other thing is that that's weird to me is that now people also try to pretend like Antifa is not primarily communist. And I'm like, dude, they just openly told everyone that. Like, this wasn't a
I've seen Soviet flags they carry.
right.
Most of them say they're communists. So there's that's interesting.
Well, right, and it basically just came down to the fact that most of them are, not all of them, and different kinds of
Right.
communists. Like, I have a picture I keep throwing around because it didn't make any sense to me that anarcho-communists would hang out with tanky communists because tanky communists would kill anarcho-communists. Like, if they ever took
Right.
over, they would just slaughter everyone who was not a statist of the highest degree. So, like, when you see somebody in Black Bloc carrying a flag with Stalin and Mao and all that, if you know anything about lefty history, well, during the it was anarcho-syndicalism slash anarcho-communism in Spain, when the people of Spain essentially took, their local means of production and then just had like a society where they were all working together. Well, who teamed up to kill them? Well, that would have been Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler. And the people that try to redo history now act like Joseph Stalin, well, the Soviets killed the fascists. And I'm like, well, yeah, only when Hitler got around to attacking them. They were just fine with, the Soviets when they were conquering Poland together or when they were killing the communists in Spain. So, like, peaceful, anarcho-communists, mind you, being different. The issue is that now we have this weird thing going on where they're all trying to pretend they don't exist. And you can see it because, like, if you go to media, like even some of the left-leaning outlets like The Hill, or Washington Post have articles identifying what Antifa is, who they are, where they are, what they look like, what they do pre 2017ish. And then all of a sudden, no, Antifa's not real. It's just an idea. Like there's
Huh.
and the same thing with the government's attention to the problem. Like I got my hands on like a domestic terrorist report on, the rising threat of leftist anarchist violence, specifically anti-capitalist, like literally identifying Antifa just perfectly. And then the government's attitude became, well, no, they're not real, they're just an idea. And then Joe Biden even famously spews that out of his mouth. And so what frustrated me is that for one thing, these people are discrediting both anarchists and leftists, and they do it by so for example, let's say you're an anarchist and you really want people to just outgrow the need for a state and the police. Probably the worst way to go about doing that would be to walk around as a roving gang and violently attacking people who say things you don't like. Like, none of that's gonna
Yes.
convince people that they don't need police. What that's gonna convince people to do is to call the police, right? And I remember
Yes.
because, again, I have anarchist friends who oppose all of this nonsense. It's like, the anti-mask, vax mandate rally in LA where Nina, I think their last name was Cohen, was an Antifa that we identified, who stabbed a kid in the chest, right?
Oh, yes.
So
I remember that.
but that was just to kind of bring you an idea of what event we're talking about. But like the issue is that so you have a group of people who are protesting what they believe to be government overreach, that they should not be forced to take vaccines or to wear masks. And so you, as an anarchist, decide that the best solution for people who don't like state overreach is to go attack them. Like, not open a dialogue, not maybe say, hey, maybe you should consider that if we just got the government out of the way. Like, it's the most ridiculous, like, counterproductive thing I've ever seen. And that's when it starts to look like you start to wonder, like, as you're analyzing it, you're like, there's no way they're doing this on purpose. Like, they think this is going to work, right? Like, because it isn't. Like, and most of these kids, especially the ones that really think they're tough, like, believe like, I remember once, because occasionally I can infiltrate their forums, and I remember being on one once, and I just asked the simple question of like, "So what are you gonna do if you abolish the police?" Yeah, because the cartel will quite happily show up and fill the power
Oh,
vacuum,
geez. Yeah, for
and
sure.
then this idiot, like, female Antifa is like, um well, I mean, what do you think we're gonna do? Do you think us, Antifa militants are just gonna stand down? And I said, no. What I think is that throwing bottles at cops who've been ordered not to shoot you is not the same thing as fighting the cartel at all. That,
Oh my gosh.
well,
I love it.
go back, say, for example, WeSpa, right? So they go and
Yes.
attack a bunch of soccer moms, with cardboard signs and street
Yep.
preachers and journalists. They attack a bunch of peaceful people and act like they're really tough, and it's all supposedly about trans rights. The thing is if they really were worried about that, in Los Angeles, MacArthur Park is where the MS-13 runs the park, and they just
Oh,
straight up murder trans people. Like, they just kill them. They stabbed one of them in the throat. Like, if they think you're gay at all, they will just kill you. But you don't find any
I've ne-
Antifa making their way over to MacArthur Park. I wonder why that
no,
is.
I've never seen them go after actual neo-Nazi gangs,
Right.
which we have in the Pacific Northwest. Um, Not a lot of them, but there's enough. But weirdly, they never speak of these people. They're more interested in going after, as you said, soccer moms with cardboard signs, easy targets.
Right.
So,
Well, yeah, and the funny thing is like and I remember talking to someone else about that. I think it was actually Jay Lee Quinn. Like, when was the last time Antifa was even present when any actual neo Nazis were there? And we're thinking like Charlottesville, but that's really been it.
um, so the I wouldn't say they were neo Nazis, but they did end up in Salem. I believe it was last year. They decided to show up. Salem's our state capital, and it's a small town. And they decided to show up to this country western themed bar where they were having an event, um, a conservative political event, and they were going to protest it. But there also happened to be some motorcycle club affiliated people there, and it was quite the rout. Like, I mean, it was an FAFO moment for them. Um, I was shocked. I just saw it on video. I was actually in Portland waiting for the the traveling event to arrive in Portland. But yeah, they don't handle. They don't understand real violence. Um, they understand mayhem.
Right, and they also don't grasp, like, especially when you get some of them that over romanticize what they're doing. They like to compare themselves to, say, the Viet Cong, and I'm like, I don't know if you know anything about Vietnam, but you guys wouldn't last long. For one thing, like, I remember because I work very closely with Mary Todd identifying these people and getting them arrested when possible.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I remember thinking was just like, okay, so sometimes they're stupid enough to just openly talk on Twitter about what's going on. And there was a incident where they got their ass whooped by the Proud Boys, and they were all blaming each other. I wanna say this was in Olympia, but it might have been in LA again. I'd have to think about it. But, I know that,
I think it was Olympia. I
Tiny
think it
was
was Olympia.
present for it, I know that.
Yes. Did he get shot in the foot?
It wasn't that day, but yes, like, and we went over that another time too, but, like, but he was present for the fight, and anyway, the point is that Antifa started arguing with each other and blaming one another for what had happened because apparently on their channels, um, they had said, "Well, hey, let's go this place and attack the fash here," but not everybody went because they think there's some kind of
Oh,
crazy anarchist collective. And so then they showed up, and the funny thing is the Proud Boys were still outnumbered like 3-1, but they just like attacked them directly, and then their morale broke, and then they basically just got harassed and followed for like 4 city blocks. And it's like, well, that's interesting. Weren't you guys like all tough and ready to go? It's like, unless, so the thing is that what I'm getting at is that they don't have a central authority and they don't respect any authority. And in the Twitter argument I was reading, and I actually have, I think, a video about that on my channel where I go over the whole Twitter conversation, but they're bickering with each other. Well, you're not authoritarian, you're not in charge. I'm like, if you disobeyed orders among the Viet Cong, you'd just be shot. Like, what do they think is going on here? That they're going to have some weird non-authoritarian army that's going to fight and somehow survive and win against, say, the cartel, against the military, against anyone really, and that's why they have a really crazy, overinflated view of what they are going to do. And more than that, they also don't really have any long-lasting plans. Like, I don't know if you remember the Weather Underground. Did you ever study them?
just a little bit. Martyr Maid talked about them, the Martyr Maid podcast, a little bit, and I've read a little bit
Well, if you go look
before.
into them, like, there's a documentary about them, and, like, a lot of their rhetoric is the same. And the only reason that the Weather Underground didn't turn into a major violent terrorist cell is that a couple of them were building a bomb to bomb an Air Force, dance party. Like, they were gonna literally blow up a bomb at a dance party, and they killed themselves. They blew up themselves trying to make the bomb. And so that all was left at that point was the somewhat less militant ones. But they all stayed involved. So, for example, one of the former members of that terrorist cell is on the board of directors that funded Black Lives Matter. And then you may remember the San Francisco prosecutor who got recalled.
Yeah,
Come to find out, he's actually the son of 2 members of the
kind of.
Weather Underground.
Yeah.
Right. So there are connections going all the way back to history. And then when you finish watching the documentary about them, you're like, well, what happened to them? Well, they all went into education and they went into law.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's where you get all of these, infiltrations of our colleges and stuff to try to, like, essentially brainwash another generation. So I think that we've done a good job now of kind of giving people some background. I've done a lot of videos on Antifa. I did a very in-depth documentary analyzing Michael Forrest Reinhold's murder of Jay Danielson. I've interviewed Chandler Pappas. I did a lot of stuff about Kyle Rittenhouse. And that's one of the things that kind of motivated me to get back on the air was the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, because people were just flagrantly lying all the time about what was obviously untrue. And that drove me nuts. And that's why I say to the audience, like, again, regardless of what your political affiliations are, I guarantee you'll find something you like on my channel. I don't try to push people to agree with me about everything. I just try to push people to think. So, with that said, let's get into what you saw at the trial. and what you learned from it and what your impressions were.
Okay. So I was asked by the Post Millennial to act as photojournalist for Katie Davis Court, who was coming down from Seattle to cover the trial. I would have attended the trial anyway as Andy's friend, of course, um, and I had planned to stay up in Portland so that I could support him. But when they asked me to do it, I said, "Great, I'd love to do that. That's my wheelhouse, and I like court cases, and I'm very good at painting a picture with my photos of what I see." So the first day, Katie and I went in very early. We had both emailed the judge separately, the judge's clerk, and received an email back. And we could tell that the media rules were going to be different, but it was really difficult to make out exactly what they were going to do. And that should have been a warning sign for me. But we went in early Monday and we were told there was going to be no media or public because it was jury selection and they were doing motions. But we wanted to get in there first thing so that we could make sure that we were actually registered, because neither of us could figure out how that was occurring. Usually it's pretty clear. This wasn't made clear. So we walked in and she said, no public is allowed. And we're like, that's fine. We're media and we know we're not allowed, but do you have us registered as, on the list? And she asked our names and said, yes, she did. And as we turned around to walk out, there was a woman sitting in the gallery wearing a mask. She was a Black woman. She was wearing a wig, really big sunglasses, and a mask. And the clerk told her that she had to leave as well. So she actually followed us out into the elevator and downstairs. And she said something to Katie. And I was like, I know who this woman is. And she is, her name is Danielle James. And she was an Antifa activist um, that ran the Revolution PDX Rising Twitter account along with one of the defendants, Elizabeth Richter. So that they were there, I thought, okay, this could be interesting, um, especially because she hadn't followed the rules already. She helped herself to the gallery and was sitting in there when we walked in there. And I was surprised because it literally said no members of the public. Katie and I stayed there the whole day and waited out in the outside in the halls outside of the courthouse, because in case they started the trial, we wanted to make sure we didn't miss a moment. So I was on my phone, just honestly playing a game I have on my phone and tweeting occasionally. Katie was working on something, and we noticed that they had assigned a deputy to the courtroom, which I thought was interesting. I hadn't seen that very often. So he was checking the hallways. There's a very strict rule. I say strict. There was a very strict rule implemented for this trial of no filming and no pictures and no audio recording in the hallways. That is a rule for the entire courthouse. I would say they're not always very strict about enforcing it, because people will get married and they'll be taking selfies out in the hallway. I've actually conducted an interview or two for a different trial out in the hallway when nobody was around. But this trial, it was clear that they were going to be watching that very carefully. So she and I were both very careful to not film, not take pictures, nothing out in the hallway. And we were warned that that might be an issue. So that was day one. The next day, the trial started, and that's what really gave me the inkling that this was going to be, I would refer to it as a circus. I, I'm not sure like, I don't know if I'm giving you enough detail or
You
if it
sound
makes
fine.
sense.
You sound fine.
Okay. All right. So, of course, we're like, what time do we need to be there? Because media goes in a little bit early. And I knew there'd be other media there. So we want to get a good seat. And so we got there, I believe, at 8:30. Might have even been 8 o'clock. Um, the Oregonian was there with their photojournalist, and there was a stringer photojournalist there, and then myself and Katie. And there were some other independent journalists that I'm not sure if I can even name their publications, but we all got in there, went in. Um, I got the worst seat, unfortunately, but I wasn't as aggressive to get it. And it was opening statements that day. It took up a lot of time. Um, One of the rules that they had, which is going to sound like silly that I even mentioned it, but that we have a silent, we need to use a silent shutter. I was the only person that has a silent shutter on my camera. So they were very clearly very concerned about anything um, drawing attention away from the um, the trial and back into the gallery. We were giving very strict instructions, of course, to not capture the jury, which we wouldn't do, and no one in the gallery. We were also not to connect to the internet while we were in the courtroom, so no live tweeting, no live streaming.
How much of this
There
is
was no.
normal and how much of this is just weird rules for this trial?
I thought most of it was really weird. I've been able to live tweet when I've registered as media. That's usually not an issue. There's usually one station. A lot of times they won't let everybody have their camera to film. They'll assign, a pool photographer and a pool videographer, which is fine. But a lot of times for photography, they'll let you have as many as you want because there's usually not more than a couple of us. But there was no video allowed. That surprised me. There was no WebEx live stream allowed to the public. Also surprised me.
Yeah, I was planning to
Um,
try to cover it if it was made like, just like we did for the Rittenhouse trial and all that. And then there was no live
right.
stream. And I'm like, what the hell? I mean, so much about this story just reeks of like Portland being this bizarre, corrupted place. But anyway,
Yes.
continue.
No, I agree. I was surprised that they weren't going to do the WebEx, which I thought would have been nice. That doesn't work for me as a photojournalist, of course, but that would have enabled a lot more people to watch and see what happened. So I'm just going to call these leftist extremists, I usually just call them extremists, but Antifa. The Antifa people, the Antifa supporters show up. And they're actually pretty loud in the gallery, which surprised me. I don't know how many people know, but when you go in court, um, you might be able to get away with the tiniest of whispers when there's like a little break in the action. But generally, you can't speak at all. You shouldn't move you need to keep your expressions as neutral as possible. Um, you need to be quiet. So they actually, a lot of these activists, Antifa, they're younger people, and they were definitely making snide comments, being snarky in the gallery while things were going on. And I did see the deputy get up and say something to one of them. Andy's supporters, we were all like, none of us were very young. Like some of these people look like they were in their 20s. Um, so I'm just going to say maybe they just didn't know better. But the rest of us were on our best behaviors. Also, because I knew that, we would be under a microscope. I had no idea how much of a microscope we were going to be under. But we were all just doing our jobs. The Antifa people came and were like looking over Katie's shoulder, trying to see what she was typing. It was very obvious. It wasn't like, no, we just thought that. It looked like in the hallways when we were out there, they were making snide comments, and most of us just tried not to even look their direction, and it did look like some of them were actually using their cameras to take pictures and film us, Andy supporters. Nobody complained about it or said anything. None of us did that I know of, responding kind. That first day we went back in after lunch, and the Antifa people had got there early and had decided to sit right in the middle of the bench right behind Andy, and they were essentially heckling him. They were actually loud enough that the deputy said something to them. We had to sit behind them, and so we could see what they were doing. They were talking and whispering together frequently, and just any chance they could. Katie had to walk over to talk to the court clerk, and they were like, "Oh, does Karen need to speak to the manager?" They were just. It was very unbecoming
Well, and it's
for.
also like, why are they tolerating it? Like, I'm willing to bet you that if the opposite was true, they would quite happily kick any of the conservatives out of the room.
Well, the crazy thing is, they have come out with this message that the conservatives were the ones doing this. And
You cut out for a
God,
moment. There you go.
sorry. The
That's okay.
crazy thing is, they were saying that the conservatives were the ones doing this, and that the conservatives were breaking protocols. The people who were not even all conservatives who were supporting Andy. I am, but they were saying that we were breaking the rules. But in reality, I mean, they were pushing every limit they possibly could. Um, they were we were told we had to turn our phones off, and at some point during the trial, they had determined we had to turn our phones off and turn them into the court to come inside the courthouse, inside of the courtroom. They were taking our phones. I don't understand why. I think somebody was like, I know that the PDX Rising account was tweeting things from court, almost like they were live tweeting. And so that was considered, a, against the rules, and they weren't supposed to do that. And I do know that there was, the Cooper Brinson, one of the attorneys. It was the judge brought it to his attention. He said, "You can look at my phone. You're welcome to look at my computer. I haven't done any of this, but I, I don't know what they were talking about, but I do know that they were definitely, they were breaking the rules. But that's the most that I saw addressed in their direction about it. That doesn't mean that it wasn't said at another time. Um, but I was surprised at how much they were letting people get away with in the gallery. So that day ended fine. I edited my photos, gave them to Katie. She did her article. Everything was good. I showed up the next morning. I started taking pictures. I was the only photojournalist there. Zane Sparling of the Oregonian was there taking notes. Katie was taking notes. There was a lot less people. We had a break, like around 10 p.m. The deputy had been sitting in the courtroom, back by the door, in a separate chair, not on the benches. And I was sitting on the very edge of the bench, so in the front bench. So he was right behind me. As we came back in from the break, I heard somebody open the door and sit down. And Katie had been sitting behind me. And what I heard, because I'm not turning around to look, it's a woman named Haley Nolan, who is a known disruptor of public events. She is affiliated with, the defendant, Elizabeth Richter, and the other Antifa people. She's a large girl, and she actually used her body to almost knock Katie Davis Court off the bench. I only know this because, my friends Julie and Tara were sitting further down from me, and they watched it. And then I could hear this woman, very loud whisper that you could hear throughout the entire courtroom. I assumed she was talking to the deputy, saying, "She's not media. She's got fake credentials. You need to check her credentials. She's not media. And I was like, what the heck? And I didn't know at the time, but Tara told me, like, I said, I didn't want to turn around to look at her. But Tara said, if you had, her face would have been right literally in your face. She had leaned forward and was whispering this in the back of my head. Andy stopped testifying. The judge was like, what is going on? You guys need to keep yourselves under control. You know, I'm just sitting there with my camera going, don't, it's not me. I'm not doing anything. So the deputies like took her out into the hallway. And it's as if on cue, the woman defense attorney, Michelle Burrows, turns around and points at me and is like, you can't take my picture. Something along those lines, saying I couldn't take pictures of her. And I was like, I looked confused. I didn't say anything. I looked at the judge, and the judge said, well, she's media, so she can. And then they're like, and John has posted this part. John Hacker's posted this part on Twitter. Of course, he left off Haley interrupting everything. They asked for a sidebar. They come back in, and they're like, the judge is saying, we need to see everyone's media credentials and get their boss's name and phone number. So I didn't have credentials. That's really not a thing. Everybody just makes your own if you make them. But it said in the instructions that we needed to have something on our body that said media and our names. So I just made a media pass with my name, and it said media, and I assumed it was so they could identify us from the public in case they needed to address us directly. So I showed her, I gave her my media pass, the court clerk. I gave her Libby Emmons' name and phone number, which I got from Katie. I just usually talk to them by email. And I thought that's it. You know, I mean, I am perfectly good to do this. In the meantime, at some point, the judge has said, please decide amongst yourselves. There's going to be one photographer who will be pool photographer. Zane Sparling of the Oregonian says, you can take the pictures. I don't want to do that. I don't even have a good camera. I have a pro camera. I have experience. So I said, of course. So all of this, we have to wait while they call. Like, it was just a weird thing. And there were other people that also had to give their media credentials. We go back into the courtroom before it's even settled, before we even really sit down. The judge is saying, the new pool photographer will be Zane Sparling of the Oregonian. And Zane's like, I don't have a camera with me. And she's like, can you get somebody down here? They're going to call in a freelancer to replace me. She said, you cannot be media if you're a freelancer. And I was like, it seemed clear that they wanted Katie and I out of the courtroom, the defense. But I was like shocked. I've never had that happen. So I actually left the courtroom because I wanted to talk to somebody about that, because I didn't think that was a thing that could happen.
Right.
And my friend and I went to lunch a little bit early and saved seats for everybody. They all got down there, and there was a man there, and I didn't know, but it was Ezra Levant or Levant. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, of Rebel News. And we were all talking about how they just kicked me out of the courtroom. They didn't kick any other media out of the courtroom. I mean, they didn't kick me out of the courtroom. They removed me from my job. My only job was to take photos. And they decided that only one person could take photos, and it couldn't be a freelancer for whatever weird reason. And this came from the defense. It was their objection. And so Ezra said, I'll write you a contract for Rebel News, and so you can be a regular employee. And I'm like, perfect. So he had a contract written up. I signed it via DocuSign. Andy is still testifying, by the way. There's like, they'd done the opening statements for both. Andy had got into testifying about what he was doing. So this kind of interrupted the flow of his story. And And there were, more than a few disruptions. So it definitely made it hard, I think, to connect the dots in this trial. So I go back to the courtroom and I submit by email and I tell the court clerk, I have the kind of contract that you guys want. Please show the judge because I would like to come back. And in the meantime, they had called a freelance photographer that I have referred to in the past as the Antifa photographer. He works, I believe, for AP, and he's a freelancer, but he puts his photos up on the wire. They'd brought him
Sure.
in, so you couldn't have a freelancer, but you could have this freelancer, and I was really hot over that because that man was taking pictures during Andy's attack in 2019, and I don't believe he showed any pictures of that attack. And then he was present, and he wasn't attacked, and he was present at the church incident where I was assaulted, and no photos of anything that happened to me being assaulted by people in block, and he didn't get attacked. I believe this man to be a bad actor, and he definitely has friendships with Antifa activists. So I was a little miffed about it and talked to somebody at Timcast, Chris Burtman, about it, and he wrote up a little story on it. The next day, I showed up to court. Andy still had been testifying the rest of that day. It was just media in there, and the defense attorney started to talk, the woman, Michelle Burrows, and she said she can't be in here. And the judge was not there. Her male tech clerk was there, and the female clerk, Ms. Sandoval, was there. And I said, well, actually, I have a contract, so now I'm an employee, and they have the contract. So immediately, her male tech employee smirked at me and got on the phone and called this same freelance photographer and asked him to come in. And I was like, and which would mean that I would not be able to take photos, but he had to leave them. And I could hear him doing it. And I was just like, what is the deal with the post-millennial hiring me to be there? This shouldn't be a problem. The judge hadn't objected at all to my presence, at all, and I'd followed all the rules. She only had a problem with my media contract after the defense objected, and there was a private sidebar that I didn't get to hear anything about. So that day I was able to take all of the pictures and provide them to the Oregonian and to Katie Davis Court. And Katie was working her butt off, by the way. I mean, she provided each day a complete written summary of everything that happened in court that she was allowed to talk about. Each day, even though the rules didn't necessarily change in print, which they should have, the rules got a little bit tighter. There were more warnings about you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that. And I'm like going through my Twitter going, am I not like, there was something I tweeted about that I wasn't supposed to tweet about. I can't even remember what it was, but I felt like I didn't know. And I've covered things in court before that was something that had been put off limits. So it just it was like increasingly uncomfortable. And I really was concerned because they were focusing so much. I could see what the Antifa activists are putting on Twitter. I could see what they were saying. They were saying things about Katie and me and implying that we were filming and videoing people in the hallways. And so, and it was a constant refrain, and that we were trying to intimidate people in the hallways. And if you know Katie or I, you know that's not even in our personality to do. And it was such a distraction from the testimony that Andy was doing. I mean, like the day that he told his story about his attacks, it was so powerful. I mean, I cried, but partly because I was with him during some of that, and it was, it was traumatic. But the constant disruptions by the defense were a huge distraction. Ezra Levant said it's like a mob trial, a mafia
Right.
trial. And so it was clear that was becoming a technique that they were using. And it became clear they were also combing through everyone's social media with a fine tooth comb and then reporting it to the judge and reporting it to the judge. It seemed like there were lots of little, like, people are doing this and people are doing that, and you're not supposed to be doing it. For me, I'm just trying to concentrate on composing photos and catching every moment. So I'm not listening to the testimony as closely because it's a different job. It's a visual job. So some of the things I'm missing because I can see there's action. I want to capture that. I want to capture if the defendants are looking, if the plaintiff looks back at me, some of the judge. But it's clear that the defense is using this disruptive technique that, to me, it disrupted the testimony, and it made it look like people who supported Andy were causing problems. And that wasn't the case. So the day that I was taking photos all by myself, the last day, somebody walked in who's I think a right-wing activist. I do believe he told me at one point when I've spoken to him over messaging that he was part of Occupy and part of the
Right.
nonviolent part of Occupy. And he has taken a dislike, like you, to the violent Black Bloc people. And in particular, he does not like John Hacker. And I'm saying this as somebody who's watched them interact on Twitter. And he actually doxed John Hacker.
Right.
His address, his house, his phone numbers, his license plates, and that got him booted from Twitter, which of course it would. He showed up in the courtroom. He sat down in the deputy's chair, and I looked at him and I said quietly, "You can't sit there," because I'm like, I don't want anybody to get in trouble. So I stood up and he sat down in the bench in the only seat left next to me. And I look over at John Hacker. John Hacker leans to his attorney and he writes something down. And one of them stands up and says, "We have a safety concern and the jury needs to go out." And so it was just like this, oh my gosh, well, like there's a bomb in the building. It was the first of many times they did this. So they send the jury out and the judge sends the public and the media out. And I knew what they were going to do. I knew they were going to take this man and remove him from the courtroom. John Hacker said that he was a supporter of Andy's. I don't actually think that this man's an Andy supporter. I think this man is on the right and really dislikes John Hacker and would like to
Right.
see him get his due. So he came up to me, the man did, and said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure they're getting ready to remove you from the courthouse. So I need to go talk to Katie, but you need to go talk to the deputy, I think." And they removed him from the building entirely. And it was such a jarring thing. Um, that day finished out. I come back into court the next morning. I'm met by the deputy, really nice guy, really hard job he's doing. And he said, "I just want you to know that it's been alleged that you were videoing the proceedings with your still camera yesterday all day." And I said, "What? Oh my gosh, no. Do you want to look at my camera? I don't even know how to turn the video on in my camera. Like I don't know I would never do that. That's against the rules." You
Right.
know, my camera has some dust spots in it right now. If I
Right.
videoed it, it would be ruined. I can clean it up in stills. But also it's against the rules and it's my personal reputation on the line and it's Andy's trial And I'm not going to screw that up for him. I would never break the rules like that. So I didn't even go in the courtroom. I went and messaged a couple of people, and I thought, I just felt sick. I was like, there's something, this is wrong. And I don't know what this is going to do, but I don't know who would have alleged this. There's no reason for them saying it because literally I didn't do it. So there would be nothing online indicating I had done it. And so I stayed out emailing some people, including some writer friends, saying, I don't know what is going on here, but this isn't good. I went back in at the break because I didn't want to enter in. Oh, they also had the stringer there. So I knew I wasn't going to be allowed to take photos. He'd shown up. I'm sure they called him. So I went back in at the break, and the judge had me stand up and said, it's been brought to my attention that you were filming the proceedings yesterday against my express, whatever, rules. And I said, Your Honor, absolutely not. I said, first of all, I don't know how to video on my camera. This is my still camera. I know I can do it, but I don't know how to. I video only on my iPhone, and it's against the rules. I'm like, I was very like, I vociferously defended myself. It was kind of terrifying because I don't like to break the rules, and I really didn't want to have that reflect poorly on Andy or the post millennial, and I was adamant that I hadn't done it. And she was like, you were in contempt of court if you do this. But there was no way to prove it. Nobody stepped forward and said they caught me doing it. Nobody showed any proof that I did it. And everybody sat back down, and I was so humiliated that I could tell I was going to start to cry. And I'm like, I can't cry in the courtroom. And I could just feel the tears. And I was like, I have to leave. Because I'm not going to cry in front of these people. And, I don't want to be a distraction. The jury was not there. So I got up and I left, and I went into the bathroom and cried, and then came back out. And my friend that had been going to the trial and taking notes for me had come out, and she said, I'm so sorry. I can't believe that they even thought you'd do that. And by this time, the court clerk had come out with my phone to give it back to me. And I said, I did not film. I would not film. And she's like, I don't think you did. But I just knew this was clearly intended to be another disruption, another issue, another problem. And I said to my friend, Andy was like finishing up testifying, and they were playing John Hacker's deposition videos. I said, I don't think I can go back in there because something's wrong. And just me being in there has become a distraction, and they're using me as a distraction, and I don't want to cause a problem.
Right.
And I found out later, the next day, that I had been banned from the courthouse. And I asked the deputy if I could see the letter, and he would only show me the letter. He wouldn't let me take a picture of it. And it said that these individuals have been banned from the courthouse. And the list of the names was on the underside. He wouldn't let me see that. And I didn't get to go back in. I did a little fundraiser for an attorney. I've hired an attorney just to be able to get this straightened out, because I don't want it to affect my ability to cover things in Multnomah County Courthouse. And I felt like this was something that was, I'd had these things alleged that I didn't do. And it was such a crap show that I was shocked the judge was allowing this. And it turns out that at least 2 of the people that were banned from the courthouse on that list hadn't even been into the courthouse at that point. And they each came in on different days and were met at the doors, essentially, of the courthouse and told that they're banned from the entire building. So that's
So go ahead and finish.
well, that's just unfortunately I can't say anything about um, like Heather Clark's testimony or Alexander Reed Ross or Elizabeth Richter testifying because I didn't get to see any of these people testify or their cross.
So one of the things that has been kind of occurring to me lately as we discuss the issues of censorship is that people tend to forget that the First Amendment includes freedom of the press and that
Yeah.
freedom of the press is supposed to exist to protect us as citizens to ensure that we are honestly informed about things that are going on in the world. And I see freedom of the press being threatened more and more all the time. And I realize that people don't consider that. They don't remember that freedom of the press is literally in the Constitution because we don't really talk about it very much, But the truth is it was there. And the founding fathers of this country understood its purpose. And there needed to be people that were there, presenting this. And it's been Antifa's modus operandi to try to limit who is allowed to film them, who is not allowed to film them. There's a memory that keeps popping up in my head as we discuss this issue and then kind of how we talked about Antifa earlier, that there was an incident where there's an older guy, little heavier, not very much heavier, but anyway, apparently he had said something to Antifa, so they went after him, and then he pulled a gun on them, right? And then a gunfight ensues on the streets of Portland. And what
Yeah.
was crazy was that there were media present that were literally like weaving between the cars and everything to get photos of what was happening, but they were all extremely careful not to get any of the pictures of the black bloc who suddenly had pistols in their hand shooting it out with this guy. And there was one person who got the footage of the incident that was released publicly on Twitter, and I wish I could find it again. I want to look at it again, but a couple people did YouTube videos about it. Because at one point, one of the guys came up behind the guy and was trying to flank him, but he wasn't in full black bloc, so his face was uncovered. He noticed he was being filmed, and he immediately darted back out of the way. But he was going to flank this guy. They shot at him, like they were trying to kill him.
Oh my
And
God.
then yeah, and then the police show up and they arrest him. And somehow none of the black bloc with pistols in their hands, who were point blank firing their pistols at him because there's bullet marks behind him, right? None of them are arrested, right? So there's something weird going on about everything in Portland, but it
Mhm.
doesn't, but like the way, again, I keep coming back to what I said, the bizarre, like, psyop that was going on to try to convince everybody that Antifa is not real, right? To convince
Yes.
everybody that, like, and in fact, the funny thing is, I often recommend, say, Crystal and Sagar from Breaking Points for independent news, but like, I originally started watching it because, again, I'm left leaning for her. And now I pretty much just listen to Sagar because she's like, I've lost all respect for her. Part of it was Rittenhouse, her coverage of that was horrible, and then it was like, what was the second thing? Her treatment of RFK was terrible, but also, like, at one point during one of her monologues, she was trying to say that Antifa was mostly fake and that the FBI was paying too much attention to Antifa, and that's why January 6th happened. And that was the final nail in the coffin. Like, okay, you're full of shit. I've got hundreds of hours of footage on my hard drive of Antifa brutally attacking people, including Bernie supporters, I might add. They beat up and bloodied a guy who had a flag who was a Bernie supporter.
I
You
was
know,
there that day, so I saw it
right,
occur from across the lines, and you could see they were trying to steal the flag from him. And I think they hit him with like a truncheon that was hid in an umbrella. And
right.
I
Because he
don't
had
think he
blood
hit
coming out of
him.
the back of his head.
Oh,
So,
he was
so
in the
the
hospital for 3 days.
right, and so for her to say mostly fake Antifa and she's an independent journalist, I'm like, yeah, that's fucking bullshit. Like, my problems with this, I mean, just beyond the issue of like, it hurts the credibility, any credibility of the left. It's that you can't have violent extremists just walking around attacking people, and like, remember when we mentioned earlier that, like, because this is another thing I forgot to mention, was that how odd it is that, okay, so for example, on the pedophile issue, okay, there are what they call turfs or whatever. They're just feminists who don't want, trans people in their spaces, right?
Yes.
And so they protest, and then mysteriously these white nationalist Nazis keep showing up to call out pedophiles. And strangely, there's never any Antifa present when this is happening to attack them, right? And then within seconds on Twitter, it's, you see, they showed up here to oppose pedophilia, and you're also opposing it. You're a Nazi. Like, they never put that together. But I knew within seconds of watching some of that protest footage, because these neo-Nazis are coming out of nowhere and they're all masked mysteriously. Adam Waffen doesn't wear masks, at least not the last time I looked. Like, not real neo-Nazis. But the point is that these people keep mysteriously showing up to, like, say, drag queen story hour or things like that to protest pedophiles, and it allows them to immediately associate anyone who opposes pedophiles with fascism and Nazis. Very convenient thing. And again, like we said, for some reason, Antifa is never there when these people are there, right? And then the only people that I've seen on footage, ironically in Portland, confront one of these groups was that a group of them showed up and walked up to the Proud Boys. And unbeknownst to many people, the Proud Boys have LGBT members. And they also are not racist. So when these guys are passing out racist, just straight up anti-gay flyers, the Proud Boys looked up and said, "You need to get the fuck out of here. Like, we
I
don't
was
want
there
anything to
that
do
day.
with you." Right.
I was
So some of this
so
stuff I'm just talking about at secondary, so I don't want you to think I'm talking down to you. I don't know how many of these things you showed up to, you know. And so, but the point is that the only people who have beat up white nationalists in recent memory that I can remember has been the Proud Boys,
yes,
not
true.
Antifa, right? Did you have more details about that incident? I didn't realize you were there.
Yeah, I came just after it happened, but I got filled in, so I am speaking secondhand. But I did also post the video. Somebody had sent me the video, and I posted it. Um, there is a personal beef between the group called Rose City Nationalists and Proud Boys. The leader of this group had been booted before he even became a Proud Boy. He was like in the beginning stages, and they booted him and it's not important why. They just didn't think he was going to meet their requirements. He started this group, but they definitely have um, a personal beef. They also don't want to be associated with um, racism and the anti-LGBT movement. That's my understanding. So that it was a double-edged sword. They didn't want them in their space, and then they don't trust the guy that actually formed the group. So
That's kind of what Mary Todd confirmed with me when I conferred with her. But like the thing is that it's weird to me that these groups exist. Like the Patriot Front just seems to literally show up in very carefully police guarded marches and then make a huge display of, like, look at us, we're evil fascists, although they don't say anything, just so that they can justify the evil fascist boogeyman that we need to be the motivation for losing all of our civil rights. And Antifa never attacks them. So that's when you start to look at it and you wonder to yourself, how much of this, like I said, remember it's WWE, right? So
right.
how many of these Antifa people are secretly at the end of the night all going to the same bar with these Patriot Front guys laughing about how they're convincing everyone, that we need to have this big terrorism thing so that we can give people, the authority to take our civil rights away. And that's what really worries me. And it's one of the biggest reasons that you have to oppose violent activism is that it will be used as an excuse. Way back in
Yes.
2008, when I started, it was the Patriot Act. And people have all forgotten about this. And that's why I tell my conservative viewers, don't just think this is about Democrats, because the Patriot Act was put together by Republicans, and it's a bipartisan supported thing. Joe Biden, voted for it, so the point is that they are trying to push us into becoming violent activists, because then they can label patriotism as extremism, right? And then eventually, if they finally get sick of progressivism, then they can label that as extremism too. They can put people who are pushing for Medicare for all, for example, in the same category as people, that want to violently attack people in the streets. And then they can just oppose all dissidents, period, and label them as domestic terrorists. And Glenn Greenwald has been doing a very good job of showing how Joe Biden was calling for a new war on domestic terror, right? And so that's why I tell people, defend yourself. Okay, absolutely defend yourself, but do not get sucked into this because people are basically slowly becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of losing their rights. Like I have friends who, because of the 2020 riots, like these were moderate Republicans, right? People who like would have been aghast at the idea of the government just rounding people up and throwing them in camps somewhere, who are now slowly kind of coming around to it. After all, they watch all this violent riot footage all the time. So eventually those people are going to be comfortable with it. The left is comfortable with it so long as it's people they disagree with. Like, they're just fine with the January 6 people being rounded up and left in solitary confinement in unconstitutional situations. 'Cause after all, they're bad people, right? And what the old school leftists that I talked to are pointing out was like, you guys don't remember like McCarthyism? You don't remember them having panels in Congress to try to like do witch hunts on anyone who might have whiffed of communism? Like, this doesn't end well. Like, this doesn't end well for anyone. And you can't just suddenly be okay with authoritarianism. Like you shouldn't just be okay with it. It's not okay that it's censorship as long as they're censoring people you don't like, because that'll come around and bite you right in the face. Like that's why I actually did a video comparing AOC to Bernie Sanders on the topic of censorship. And one of the things is Bernie Sanders pointed out that banning Trump from Twitter was not okay. And he said that okay, so they banned Trump this time. Who's it going to be next time? Like he understood. She, on the other hand, is all about censoring anybody that she's like, what did she say? Very, very clearly inciting violence, like Tucker Carlson. And I'm just like,
Right.
I don't watch a lot of Fox, but the guy ain't calling for violence. You're just lying. Like, like disagreeing with you is not inciting violence, but they want it to be. So anyway, thank you for listening to my rant. Go
Yeah,
ahead and
no,
comment on what I
I
said, and then if you
agree.
had anything, then I'll talk some more when you're ready.
No, I totally agree. No violence is really the only way. And even self defense is a problem in Portland. So,
Right.
um, and I do know that a lot of people won't even come to Portland anymore because they're concerned about being charged for something minor while they're, assaulted till they're a bloody mess. Um, Portland is kind of lawless, um, unless you're on the left, the far that the Antifa. Some of
Right.
them are in trouble, but they're able to. Seems like they're able to get away with a lot. Um, I wish I could tell you more about Andy's trial and the cross of Dr. Alexander Ross, because I think that was something that should have been highlighted. The public should have seen it. Um, he is an extremist that is um, affiliated with Antifa. He and Shane Burley worked together and published articles together. Dr. Owen Linehan, who actually put out a study on connecting Antifa and journalists on Twitter and got canceled for that. That's where that whole kill list for Adam Waffen came from. And it came from Reed Ross and Shane Burley. Um, they're actively involved with training anti-fascists. And James O'Keefe had an undercover person that literally showed Burley teaching a class. I'm not sure if Alexander Reed Ross was part of that as well, but he is admittedly part of it, and he was allowed to testify as an expert in extreme right-wing extremism. And I think, he should have been disqualified on those grounds. But they did do a really good cross on him, I heard. I unfortunately didn't get to go to the rest of the trial. I sat outside on Monday and then all day Tuesday waiting for the verdict. I
Well, we
I
could still talk about what's been discussed about it openly. Like I saw the news reported on it, but I am getting a question from the audience, and it's okay if
okay.
you don't feel comfortable answering.
No,
Um,
ask away.
but do you have any impressions of the jury, like without giving any personal, like,
Yes, I do.
information? But yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
um, after the trial, well, yes, I think that the jury seemed fine. They seemed like they were taking notes. There was a couple people that clearly got sleepy during a couple
Right.
parts of it. Um, I didn't know how much. I mean, they definitely expressed that they were concerned about being doxxed, but um, the judge went to great pains to reassure them that this would not happen. Um, so they took notes, and I feel like there was a lot of evidence that Andy had, a lot of evidence that was objected to by the defense, and it was not allowed. Things that did not make sense to me to not be allowed. I'm not an attorney, but I think a lot of people were shocked. I think his attorneys maybe were surprised at things that weren't allowed. They weren't allowed to talk about the depositions where it was clear that Richter and Hacker destroyed evidence on their phones of them cooperating and talking to other people about these things that happened. And you weren't even allowed to mention in front of the jury that evidence was destroyed in any way, even though it clearly impacted the case. So there were a lot of decisions that were made that would have made it harder, I think, for the jury to connect the dots. I I feel like they were fair considering the amount of information they had, but they didn't have anything nearing a complete picture. Plus, as much of a circus as it was, it I guarantee you that was a huge distraction. All the interruptions that the defense called for.
Paul Ross from the chat says that he heard that Antifa had like 12 lawyers. Where did they get them?
Yes, I heard the same thing. I believe it's through Oregon Justice Resource Center, but I could be wrong on the name. John, I think, hired his own attorney, and then Cooper Brinson was, I think, with that. I just call it the Antifa law firm. I wasn't going to write the story on it, so I wasn't paying attention to the name. But they usually had 5 attorneys total in court. One of them could have been a paralegal. No, it's not like anybody did introductions. Sometimes there were 6 people, and then there were people on lawyers on WebEx um, watching the trial. At the same time, I heard that they were also coming through our social media. I could tweet the few times I tweeted something that, like, she changed a rule when I wasn't in the court that you weren't supposed to mention if you saw someone in the hallway that you knew, you weren't supposed to mention that in a tweet. And I saw the Antifa photographer shake hands with an Antifa journalist, like the freelancer they appointed as the pool photographer, and I tweeted about that, and they knew within minutes that I had tweeted that. That really bothered me.
Well, right, and that's especially how so lawyers could watch that thing on WebEx, but you can't, like, but it can't be streamed anywhere. I don't
Yeah,
know. Those are
that's
so many opportunities, like, so convoluted and ridiculous that they could get away with that. I do wanna take a quick second to segue, into this question. So Antifa has pedos in their ranks. So I wanna share that, I uncovered this recently because, somebody and I actually confirmed it with some others later, but, like, there's a guy named Wilhelm Reich. I think I'm spelling it right. He wrote an anti-fascist book shortly after World War II, and one of the things that he identified, the book is called The Mass Psychology of Fascism. And in the book, he suggested that fascism is sexual repression, and that the best way to protect children from sexual repression, like meaning from fascism, the best way to protect children from fascism was to sexualize them at as young an age as possible.
how.
And, I through a friend of mine who infiltrates these groups, they asked someone, "Have you guys read this book? What do you think about it?" And then Antifa responded, "Oh yeah, that's a great book, blah 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 blah." So they are reading it, and it just openly states that in order to fight fascism, you need to sexualize children. So that starts to bring you around to understanding why they're so interested in things like the Wi Spa, why they're protecting these drag shows that are inappropriate for kids, so that people can bring their kids to them. They honestly have a belief that sexualizing children is somehow to protect them from fascism. And, if you go further than that, you can go down the rabbit hole. And I've done a lot of different videos about this topic. You guys can check them out. One of them is I uncovered that one of the more popular LGBTQ child education, like literally was a sex educator. She operates a website called Scarletine, which is like one of the most widely used sex education websites. Well, she wrote an article calling for the normalization of sex between kids and adults. Like,
Wow.
and right, and her books are in schools right now, and she doesn't put that in the books in schools, but she's involved in things like, um, teaching teachers how to open up these groups, to get kids to come out, and then like targeting kids who don't have any friends, So anyway, it's a mild segue, but because of the fact that people brought up Antifa, I felt the need to share this. You guys can find Wilhelm Reich's book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, and see it for yourself. But again, they have a fundamental belief that sexualizing children will fight fascism. And that's why they're fighting to protect the rights of people to sexualize children. And, so anyway, and I'm sure that there are individual members of Antifa who don't agree with that, I might add, but there is a popular Antifa author, who was. And just a few days ago, I had on the now viral professor, Derek Jensen. And he was the one who was doing the Queer Theory Jeopardy video. I assume you've seen that, and he identified Michael Foucault or Michel Foucault, whatever. Anyway, it's a French guy, and he was also pro pedophile and was an anarchist. There's a lot of people, unfortunately, in the anarchist community, of which Antifa has a lot of members, who are also pro pedophile. So that information is all out there. It's just a question of getting people to ever put the two dots together. And I'm working on a documentary that I'm going to call "Okay Groomer," specifically about this topic because I'm just sick of people lying about it endlessly. So and I also wanted to give a shout out to Freya, who's in the chat. Freya is actually a trans activist who's against children transitioning, and I'm always worried about them because they're kind
I
of a
love
small
Freya.
person, and they go to these events and they're so tiny, and I'm like, oh my god, if Antifa gets their hands on this person. So if you are listening to this and you see Freya at a protest, please look out for them.
She's
So
amazing.
right, she is. And you guys, I've interviewed her. You guys can check that out here too. It's actually one of my more popular videos because one of the things that I am exposing that there are people trying to use the LGBTQ community to try to normalize this, but there are plenty of people who are not on board with that in that community. They're just the quieter ones, but that's slowly starting to change because they're getting sick of these people essentially ruining the legitimate, activism of gay people who just wanted to be left alone. And that is actually the majority, but you're not hearing from them, you know. So anyway, so as far as the trial, the other thing that going back to it was that there were descriptions of this, and obviously, unfortunately, you weren't present for it. But apparently, like during the ending of it, like the defense attorney said, "I am Antifa. I should have a T-shirt that says that I'm Antifa, and I'm gonna remember all of your faces." You
Okay.
know, go ahead.
So I did listen to the clip. I can see why people who were there for Andy were horrified at it. Um, I would have been too, because you don't know how the jury is taking that. And the jury's already expressed concerns about being doxxed. And this woman had, created a lot of disruptions, and she's like, Proud Boys carrying Nazi flags. And I remember Andy was on the stand. She's like, no, actually, there weren't any Nazi flags there, because if there were, that'd have been a national news story. So just
For
to give you an
sure.
idea, she's over the top. Like, I think she believes this hype about actual Nazis. I would say she's a boomer. Um, So she's saying these things. And now I had people who disagreed with me and thought she was, in with Antifa. I do think she's like, I'm an anti-fascist too kind of person. It just means you're against fascism. Now, she definitely said those things, and uh, I think it was a really weird closing statement. I don't think she was intending to threaten people. I think it just sounded threatening because I think she's clueless about um, what she's actually talking about. So, other
Right.
people.
Well, so you're suggesting you don't believe she's really Antifa, you just think she's just saying it to say it?
Oh, so yeah. I think she's a boomer. Just a she's an awful. Um, I'm trying to think of how I would describe her. She's just that uber liberal, progressive white lady who's like, I'm Antifa. And she would be like with a yellow wall of moms and the yellow t shirt. And she would go home at 9 p.m., not realizing that half of the yellow wall of moms stayed there and is now in block, using that action as cover. She's like, I don't think she gets it. That's my opinion. Other people disagreed with me on my side. So, um, I
Well,
don't.
it's also possible that she might be getting duped. That was another thing that I forgot to mention that I remember earlier because people were saying, well, everybody's Antifa. Everybody who opposes fascism is Antifa. The wall of moms are Antifa. And I'm like, um, you can oppose fascism without being part of a domestic terrorist cell that
Yes.
believes that, it's just there's so many plays on words. And again, this is bipartisan, like the Patriot Act. Of course, you want to vote for the Patriot Act. Aren't you a patriot? Black Lives Matter. Don't you believe Black Lives Matter? Therefore, you should totally support this organization that's an incredible grift that's giving millions of dollars to themselves and nothing to the black people that they're supposed to be helping. But
Yes.
hey, Black Lives Matter, right? And Antifa, it's a fun word, well, it's anti-fascist. So if you're not Antifa, then you're fascist. And like, I was like, dude, I'm Irish, okay? I do believe in a unified Ireland. I don't support the IRA because they bomb innocent people. Like,
Right.
see how that works? Like, you don't have to agree with what a group does and then still be like, and that was the reason why they do these false dichotomies. Do not allow them to apply these words to you guys. And you have to remember that they're playing a game of repeating the lie as often as possible. It's ironically a fascist move to repeat the lie. It's a Goebbels Nazi strategy to repeat the lie. So when you see somebody saying this bullshit that everybody's Antifa or whatever, make sure that you call this out every single time they do it. It takes up a lot of my time on Twitter. Um, because we have to fight this by saying the opposite. That's and so anyway, the reason I brought them up is that she may have even been convinced, oh, well, all the Antifa is just opposing fascism. And well, hey, who doesn't oppose fascism, right? The problem is that their definition of fascism is becoming as vague as the definition of racism and the vague as the definition of transphobia. That now anybody who doesn't agree with any aspect of the trans thing is literally a transphobe, including Caitlyn Jenner. I don't know how that works,
I
right?
don't either.
And any black person who doesn't go along with the Black Lives Matter thing, well, they're racist somehow while being black. Well, it's internalized this. Like there's always internalized, which is the invisible problem. Like internalized misogyny, internalized, like, no, how about they just don't agree with you because you're an extremist nutcase, right? So in any case, I look at this, then I'm astonished that somebody could say, I am Antifa, and then say to the jury, who the judge has stated has voiced to him concerns about being doxxed, I will remember all of your faces. Like, how do you put those two things together and not have a mistrial? Like, I don't. Go ahead and comment.
I There are so many points in that trial. Well, I was sure they were going to have to call a mistrial. Um, by the time we got to there, I realized, like, I didn't hear it when it happened, but I thought before they're not going to have a mistrial with this trial. They're just not. unless the defense um, didn't get their way. So, um, yeah, I'm not surprised it was allowed. Uh, I think most of the people in Portland believe that lie that Antifa just means anti-fascist. It takes a lot to get through to people who've been mind virused, and most of these people have been mind virused.
Yeah, and I see that, and I think that in many cases, especially since there's so much bad press on the topic, and again, they don't watch this stuff. Like, I came to my conclusions by just watching raw footage. Like, that's the best way to know what's going on. Like,
Well, most
don't
people
listen to the
don't do
go
that.
ahead.
Most people
Right.
don't do that. That's the problem. Is I know this stuff because I have been down there countless hours watching these things happen, or watching live streams where these things happened before it gets sanitized and sent out to legacy and corporate media, if they even bother to cover it at all. So the majority of people, especially in Portland, they don't feel the need to go search for any information on this. They just already know this is the truth. Like, Proud Boys are evil and Antifa is good because it means anti-fascist. And I think when you live in a monoculture, it's very, very difficult to get through to people. The cognitive dissonance they would need to overcome, is it's too much. And then you couple it with a legal monoculture where it's a corrupt legal system that has an intrinsic bias. They don't even, I think a lot of times they don't even realize their bias. I think they believe the hype. Um, it just, I think it would be very, 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 very difficult to win in Portland in that way.
Well, and that's something that I try to warn people against. It's why I said that my channel is really about thinking or not thinking. Like, you don't have to come to the same conclusions as I am, but please study what the hell's going on. You watch the raw footage, and that's how you're going to get the best analysis. I mean, I got into this as literally a guy who voted for Bernie Sanders in 16 and 20, and then I see people lying about Kyle Rittenhouse, and I went into it. I'm like, I'm going to make a documentary about this because it's so controversial. And I was like, okay, well, I was kind of waiting for somebody to get shot at one of these things. Let's go see what happened. And the reason I was feeling that way was because they had just kicked that guy in the head in Portland.
Yep.
Um, and I'm like, and that clip is enraging. Like, my son and I were watching that together, like, holy crap, this does not make me any more interested in their cause. And then they accused Drew Hernandez of selective editing. He's like, well, fine, I'll release the whole thing, but it's not going to be any better for you, because he had been following those people around for a while, and they were just randomly finding white people to beat up. Like, that was what they were doing, under the
Wow.
guise of being BLM security. You can watch the whole video. They beat up some other guy before that, and then they accosted a white trans woman, right? And then, like, beat on her. Like, that whole incident with none of that providing context did not make that any better at all. It made it worse. But that was what was fresh in my mind, and that's why I immediately made I mean, now I'm partially paralyzed in my back, so I won't be going to anything ever again. But especially if Antifa ever figured out who I was, they'd have to find out that I'm armed, But the point is that this was all fresh in the minds of people when the Kyle Rittenhouse thing happened. And to me, I'm like, so I went into it. I'm like, I watched the footage. I'm like, people are just lying about this. He didn't just randomly shoot into the crowd. He didn't even, do you remember, like, after that trial, there were all these tweets coming out from people going, wait a minute, he didn't shoot any black people? Because they didn't know that he didn't
Yeah.
shoot any black people because
Yeah,
they
I
were
watched
following
those.
MSNBC, right?
Yep.
But on the other side of it, because I know people who know him very well, he's not perfect either. So, like, the conservative spin on it was like he was some kid G.I. Joe, and that's not true either, right? No, did he defend himself? Absolutely. Did he have a reason to be there? Absolutely. And I hated the way they were covering it because, again, I oppose all violent activism, not just because it's wrong, it's not effective, right?
Yeah.
That their chronology of events literally begins with Kyle showing up, as if they didn't break an elderly man's jaw the night before for trying to put out a fire in his, furniture store. Or, like, and I interviewed Grambo, I interviewed Nathan DeBruin and a bunch of people that were there. And it just became very clear to me that the way the media works now, and this is why I tell people, just don't allow anybody else to do your thinking for you. Those days are over. You can't rely on the media to do any of this. You've got to be hyper aware of the fact that you're being manipulated from all directions, whether you're watching Fox, OAN, MSNBC. There is no good corporate media, period. Get rid of all of it. Put on your thinking caps and start to get deep into these things yourself. Like, and even if you're just watching a raw stream, which is what I honestly advise people do, just watch a raw stream. Don't listen to the commentary. Just watch it for yourself, right? Well, that's when I came to the conclusion, okay, well, here's the difference between Antifa and the Proud Boys. And Chandler Pappas actually was one of the first people to bring this to my attention when I interviewed him. And for those who don't know who Chandler is, Chandler was present when Michael Forrest Reinhold murdered Jay Danielson. He's actually a good friend of mine. Now Chandler's a good friend of mine. Anyway, so there wouldn't be any Proud Boys if there wasn't Antifa attacking people, is what he pointed out. He said that this started because people got sick of watching a group of people bullying people and hurting them, and nobody was doing anything about it because the cops are generally ordered to stand down, right? And so he also pointed out, and I because this is something I kind of responded to him about. I was like, come to think of it, I I never see the Proud Boys show up at, say, a Medicare for All rally to beat people up, right? They don't, like, that doesn't happen, right?
No.
But if there's any kind of capitalist anything, then Antifa will show up and if they think they can get away with it and attack innocent people. And that's why I said, no, it's not a two sides thing. You guys start this 99% of the time, right? And then that's just the truth. And I didn't get that from Fox. I don't watch mainstream media. I watch the raw footage, including the footage that they themselves put out, right? They don't realize how much they incriminate themselves. Like, let's look back, like we were talking about this earlier. Let's look back at some of the spin that Antifa has put out in the past, right? So Tiny Toise shot himself in the foot, right? Do you remember that one? And for
Yeah.
weeks, they repeated the lie that that is what happened. And unfortunately for them, Mary Todd was on the fucking scene. And she was like, nope, that's not what happened. Look at this CTV footage of a member of Antifa pulling out their pistol and firing at the Proud Boys. That's what really happened. But for weeks, they lied about it. And the way that they operate on Twitter is always funny. Like guys like Chad Loader, if you make any kind of posts on Twitter to refute what they're saying, they block you immediately. And it's because they want to control the narrative. They can't have anybody coming up there and, and respinning their spin for them. Like when Nina Cohen stabbed that kid in the chest, they put it out that he was just walking around beating everybody with his skateboard. And I'm like, aside from the fact that I don't think Antifa would find it in their best interest that we escalate to getting stabbed in the chest for hitting people with skateboards, because they do it all the time, that isn't what happened, right? And Jaylee Quinn was like, I don't know, 10 feet away from that, got a great video of it. And it became clear what was going on. He had his skateboard up in a defensive posture and Nina stabbed him in the chest, right? So anyway, another great spin was the murder of Michael Reinhold and how that went down. Like they had all of these ways to try to justify it, because you got to remember the first thing that they would always do when you're arguing with these people is they would spam you with that article that said Antifa linked to no murders in the last 50 years or something like that. And then a guy who identifies himself as Antifa, 100% Antifa, goes and just stalks and murders a guy in the middle of the street. And I remember watching that story evolve because it was interesting. Because initially people tried to deny he was Antifa, right? Like, well, he wasn't Antifa. He was anti-fascist. I'm like, no, dude, come on, just stop. So now they've stopped doing that. They've just turned, they just went from like trying to deny that he was one of them to instantly, now he's a martyr, and that's also when you talk to them, the only conversation they want to have is how he got shot by cops. They're not interested in any way about talking about what he did. Right.
John Hacker is one of the main proponents and one of the defendants of this. He tells the story that Jay Danielson brought it on himself. And if
Hmm.
you start that conversation with him, he has reasons why he think that Reinhold did it in self-defense. And it's I don't the video evidence is so clear on what happened. Like,
Oh man,
he
I
had
would be his
no
Huckleberry. Bring him on. I will debate that guy into the ground.
all you have to do is mention it on his timeline, and he'll probably hear me saying this, because I guarantee you somebody's going to listen to this and tell him um, that I said this. But yeah, I would like to see you. And I think you have gone around and around with him before. He's John the Lefty on
Oh
Twitter.
yeah, I remember that guy. Yep,
Yes.
yep.
So he's. I think it's really despicable when they do that, because it was clearly a murder. But
Right, and the thing is that then they tried to release more footage later that was taken on someone's phone, like they thought it was gonna make the situation look better, but all it really confirmed for me was what we had already seen. Somehow it's self-defense. I know when I'm defending myself, I always wait in a, in a walkway and wait for the person to go by so that I can get behind them and they can't see me because I'm defending
right,
them against the thing they're not even doing. Then I'm gonna run way out of my way around a car and I'm gonna turn and point my gun at you, right? And then you're gonna react by pepper spraying at me, so then I shoot you, and then I'm off and you're not. And I did a video about that too, because somebody tried to say, "Well, it's self-defense." I'm like, "Against bear mace?" I was like, "Just so we're clear, because again, just like the escalation, like, about Nina and stabbing people in the chest over skateboards, is it okay to shoot people for bear macing now? Because you guys do that an awful lot to people that are just talking, like, who haven't done anything to you. So, like, if that's the new norm, that's the policy, get ready to see a whole lot of dead kids laying there in black hoodies, because that's what would happen if we just shot everybody in Antifa who openly, preemptively bear maces people who they're not even in a violent conflict with.
absolutely.
So, you've been fantastic. We didn't really talk about how long you wanted to be on. Do you got a little more in you or what?
Well, Tam put in a comment. Tam follows me on um, Twitter, and she said, "Ask her about her pinned photo on Twitter." So I don't know if you've seen my pinned photo. I'm not sure why she wanted. Um,
Do you want to talk about it or whatever
yeah,
it is?
yeah, I do.
Okay, I'm gonna go find it.
Um,
Go ahead and talk.
it's so I've done environmental portraits. I do that. I'm a portrait photographer as well as doing the photojournalism, because, as you know, photojournalism doesn't really pay the bills. Um, but I've done a lot of environmental portraits of Proud Boys, and I started meeting them in June of 2017, and what I've followed a lot of them, and then the narrative about them, and watched that be formed in its infancy, and watch how it veered away from reality. Um, like, if you've been watching since 2017, you could see what they were attempting to do to Proud Boys once they stood up. So I have a real soft spot for them, especially the men in the Pacific Northwest that I know, um, and cared for, and that escorted me to my car and made sure that I was safe from getting attacked, because that's about the only way you can function as a photojournalist on the ground in the Pacific Northwest without losing your equipment. Um, that's a portrait I did of a Proud Boy that I was close to, Aaron Leger, and he was a veteran that suffered with terrible PTSD, probably one of the worst cases I've ever seen. And he joined the Proud Boys because he wanted a brotherhood, and he found that there. And he found a group of men that accepted him as he was and loved him and gave him um, a sort of brotherhood that he missed in the military. And he passed away last December of RSV and pneumonia. And so I just posted that, all the portraits I had of him, um, and just in a tribute to him. I hate what's been done to Proud Boys, and I really hate what it did to his life, standing up for the things that he believed was right, loving this country, um, and standing up against those thugs in black. And they all celebrated when he died, thousands and thousands of them. It's pretty horrible. And I
Well,
felt like he deserved a memorial that talked about who he truly was.
well, and that's one of the things that I covered in my documentary was that they celebrated when Jay Danielson died, yet they're supposedly not a violent group. Like,
Oh, that
they
was
cheered for it. Like,
disgusting.
yeah, and I just it's like at the end of the day, and this is the picture you were talking about, right? So this was the one.
Yes, it is.
Right. This is very iconic. You did a very good job there, very dramatic.
Thank
And so I think you've kind of captured a little essence of who this person was, and that's really what a photographer as their art is supposed to be doing. So um I'm glad that you got an opportunity to do this, and I think that, like you mentioned, like a group of men who accepted them for who they were, like is something that a lot of men are hungering for right now. And
Yeah.
ironically, even Vosh, who's like a terrible leftist, Vosh is horrible. He said, "Well, can you really expect anything else? Because the left doesn't talk to these men, and the right does." So,
Yep.
what are you gonna expect to come out the other side of that, right? Like, and that was the one of the only times he's ever made a valid point, but I don't think he has any way of correcting it because the only role that men seem to have in the modern left, and I want, you know what? I'm gonna say this term again, alt left, because there are plenty of people on the left who also don't agree with all this bullshit. So what alt right is
Yeah.
accused of being, there's definitely an alt left too. And so that anyway, my main point was like, you wanna know why Jordan Peterson is popular, you wanna know why anybody might be looking for somewhere to go, and it's because the only role you can play around these people, if you're a straight white male, cis male, is to be some kind of, like, completely submissive, mostly silent, does what they're told, like, that was the other thing that happened during Occupy that led me to believe that this was all some kind of social, like a sociological bomb to try to divide and conquer us. Because when the progressive stack thing happened, essentially that was, we went from being the unified 99% against the 1% to suddenly being fractured into 13%, 12%. Are you gay and black and trans? Well, now you're more important. It becomes the all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others that they mention in Animal Farm. And it's not about equality anymore. Like when I first went to Occupy, it was colorblind, gender neutral. Nobody cared who you were sleeping with. Nobody cared what your skin color was. We were all unified under one purpose. And then doing this, it accomplished two things. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, wokeness starts showing up. And these university people who are showing up to educate us about why all the white people in the camp are secretly evil, even if they don't realize it. And the only way they can atone for it is to become a completely submissive soy boy with no opinions. And if you want to win an argument, just tell them to check their privilege, even if what you said is absolutely asinine, right? Like, that's how everything became. And then it alienated those people. And then it started, and then eventually, though, the problem with wokeness is it's never satisfied. It just keeps going. Like, and if, in other words, if you run out of witches, then you just start turning on each other in the witch hunt, you know? And so the reason I bring this up is that the other thing that I felt was kind of uncanny was that this was right about the same time that Ron Paul was reaching out to the Tea Party and saying, hey, you and Occupy have some common enemies. Why don't you guys try to work together for the poor, working class, to oppose what's going on with the big banks owning everything and controlling everything. And the Tea Party started to be receptive to that. And I would say it was probably within about a month of that statement by Ron Paul that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, all these college educated people show up to inform us why we should all hate each other.
Oh,
And then, of course, as you can imagine, wokeness is definitely not going to be okay with conservative activists. So they turned right back around, and then there was no kind of collaboration, right? But when you think about it, who does that benefit, right? And I think that conservatives are starting to get this. They're starting to get that, like, the super duper wealthy, like the ones who essentially own the deep state, are not your friends. And it doesn't matter if you're a capitalist or a communist, people who have this enormous wealth and power to essentially be like godlike present a threat to everybody else in the world, right? And it's to their benefit if we are constantly fighting each other. It is to their benefit if we can't think straight. Like I remember Logical Checkmate, he's a friend of mine from the Czech Republic, and he also did a lot of great Rittenhouse videos. And he was like, man, you guys can't even get like basic facts straight about Rittenhouse didn't shoot black people. How can you even have meaningful conversations about healthcare? How can you even have meaningful conversations about the border or whatever? Because you guys can't even get basic facts right, you know? And I'm like, no, you're not wrong, right? You know, and that's how you end up with these bizarre situations. Like they want to control our social media. Like, did you watch them desperately try to censor RFK Jr. when Jim
yeah.
Jordan asked him to testify? Like, they were so desperate to shut him up. And, you know, they were willing to do any authoritarian thing they could to make that happen. And then they wanted to just be able to say lies about him and then deny him the ability for him to respond, right? This none of this works out. And RFK Jr. made a very fantastic point that I hope that anyone else on the left, you know, who's listening to this understands. The ones calling for censorship are never the good guys. They're not, you know, and it affects your mind and you think to yourself, oh, well, this is so easy. So I say censorship's not just like a concept, it's a mentality. You get into that mentality and then it's so easy. We don't need to argue anymore. We'll just make sure the other side can't talk, right? You know, so these were things that everybody understood as Americans. Not left, not right, you know, two wings of the same eagle, right? All Americans understood censorship is not okay. Intimidating and or hindering the press is not okay, right? You know, excessive lying in our mainstream media is not okay. You know, and that's why they're all panicking because people like you are doing the work that you're doing. People like me are doing the work that I'm doing. And I would tell everybody right now, if you're listening to this, you know, that's one of the reasons I called out Freya was that you got to like give credit to these independent media people like WYSIWYG TV, like Jay Lee Quinn, like Villain Report before he passed away. I got to interview him. He was great. You know, these are people sometimes you're not always going to agree with, right? But you at least need to try to find the people that are sincere and attempting to be honest as much as possible, right? And, you know, so I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing. And I know that you're putting yourself out there and in danger. I honestly wish I could join you. You know, like I have a lot of old
Thank you.
videos from back when I was at Occupy Flint, you know, that people can check out on my old channel, you know, but just remember, guys, you know, my content is meant to be, you know, palatable to both sides of the political spectrum, you know, as far as like economics, but like there are some things like not okay with transing kids. I'm not okay with schools lying to parents or telling kids to lie to parents. I'm not okay with schools indoctrinating children. And there are actually more people on the left who feel that way than you might think. But we're so polarized at this point that those people can't even make overtures to, you know, to the other side to work together on the things we agree on. Like I just actually recently had a friend who does a lot of great documentaries that are anti-war. And I asked him to come on again because he had just done a new movie. And he's like, well, I can't really do that because of your position on gender issues.
Oh,
And we
geez.
resolved it. Well, I mean, we resolved it. You know, it was more just like, okay, well, I didn't want to talk to you about that. I wanted to talk to you about your new anti-war movie. But but I did mention to him, do you remember that they just tried to revitalize the anti-war movement and it was going to be bipartisan and both right and left speakers showed up? And what happened? Both sides wanted to cancel anyone who might share the stage with those people. Chris Hedges, for example, is a total socialist, but he's anti-Antifa for one thing. He thinks they're stupid, and he's right. But also, he's anti-war, and so he shared the stage with other right-leaning people who are also anti-war, and then they bitched about it. You know, and then they'll call you far right. Like apparently, I'm supposedly far right. Russell Brand is somehow far right. Glenn Greenwald is somehow far right, and anybody that they don't agree with about any little thing is somehow far right. That's not how the political compass works, right? I always
Yeah.
share this little meme that says the political compass of the modern left, and it just has this little box in the upper left hand corner that's the left, and then everything else is far right, because that's how they want it to be, and they're just wrong, you know. So in any case, I want to thank you again for coming on. Was there anyone else that you wanted to shout out, or any future things that you want to tell people about that you're going to be doing?
Um, I'll be still covering some trials, and I'll cover any of the events in the Pacific Northwest that I can. Any support, whether it's just words of encouragement or if you want to send me tips, that's wonderful. I especially love the words of encouragement because sometimes this work makes you feel like you're really alone and you can feel like you're going a little bit crazy. So I appreciate meeting um, people who enjoy hearing from me and like the work that I'm doing. That's really big. So, and I
Well,
appreciate you
yeah.
taking the
Go
time to
ahead.
talk to me. And thank you for
No, and
taking
that's
the time.
fine. And then keep my info, and even if you just ever need to just talk off the air, I'm cool with it. Don't let this stuff bother you. Like Freya's the same way. I'm always worried about Freya because, like I said, they're this dainty little person who's going to these places where there's violent people. But like, you guys ever just need to talk. I'm a journalist when it's appropriate. I also have a private life, so feel free to reach out if it ever comes to that. Especially doing the kind of work that you're doing, it's really important that it's being done. And I would encourage everybody. I put your Twitter in the description of my YouTube video. Is that the best way to find your work?
Yes, that's pretty much where I link everything to. I do have a Substack where I put everything I've ever done, but I freelance a lot, and so I'm taking pictures. But everything goes out through Twitter.
Right. Okay. Well, Tam was nice enough to throw the Twitter right there, and I put it up. And again, it is in the description, folks. For those of you who might be viewing this on one of the other mediums, and I'll talk to you briefly off the air if that's okay with you. Real quickly when we're done here. But
Sure.
what I wanted to say to everybody is once again, thank you everybody for tuning in today. Again, like, subscribe, ring the bell, but also if you can't support the show financially, please just share the link. I get crushed in the algorithm. Like I was on Good Logic's show. He's one of my favorite of the law tubers, and I got 1,000 subscribers. And then he and I watched in real time as YouTube removed all but 100 of them, all in one big chunk, while he and I were literally watching my subscriber count. And
Wow.
that's how this works. I usually only get new subscribers when people see me on other streams, and then it's a question of YouTube lets me keep them or not. So that's another reason why I have Discord. If you want to join my Discord, be aware of the fact that my Discord is politically diverse, as in I tolerate anyone as long as they can follow one simple rule: no personal attack. And the reason for that is that I feel that we as a society fall to that far too quickly, and it just ends up turning into mudslinging, and then no truth is ever found. In its own way, personal attack is censorship. If you tolerate a lot of personal attack, then at that point, a lot of people are just not going to talk because they're afraid of the people who do that, and so in effect, they're censoring them, right? So I will not allow you to personally attack each other, but you're free to have any beliefs you want. Just be aware of the fact that you will be challenged. Like there's no echo chambers. And I tell people, get out of the goddamn echo chambers. I listen to a bunch of people that I don't always agree with. You need to do the same. Test your mental muscles, so to speak, by constantly exposing yourself to people on the other side of the viewpoints that you can understand them. If your views are solid, you shouldn't need an echo chamber to protect you from any possible outside influence. So, like, I have friends who don't understand, for example, why I listen to Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro, given the rest of my political background. And I point out to them, I'm like, I don't agree with everything they say, but I also don't disagree with everything they say because they're humans and so am I. Right. And if you look at the artwork that I use for my show, it's V for Vendetta holding up a decapitated elephant and a decapitated donkey. That is my message that I feel that I want the political parties to go away. Political parties are terrible. They were never intended in the Constitution. And that's why we end up in these stupid situations like people either have to be a Republican or they have to be a Democrat or they can't run for president. That was never even ever fathomed or supported by the founding fathers. They wanted us to be able to be, individuals. So, for example, I'm also extremely pro Second Amendment. So, where do I fit? Right? Like, is there any place for people who want to see healthcare but also want the Second Amendment? No, for some reason there isn't. And that's because our politics are all pre-packaged and you're just expected to go along with absolutely all of it. It's all bullshit. Like, be yourself, be your own person. And if you do join one of these political parties, only do it to facilitate your way to be able to vote for the person that you want to. So, anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. I know that I saw that there were a lot of new faces in the chat today. I hope you guys really enjoyed today. Check out my archives. I've just had a couple of really good shows recently, and also usually on Sundays, every Sunday at 6, I do a co-show with a show called Liberty Unleashed. Liberty Unleashed is a right-leaning libertarian guy, so I come on as a left libertarian-leaning guy, and then we analyze, current events and things that are going on in the world from the libertarian perspective, with both kind of, perspectives being stated. So I hope that you guys will check it out. And thanks for tuning in. And again, like I said, if you can't financially support me, just share this stuff, word of mouth it, because that's really the only way this kind of information is going to get out there. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to V Radio.